What is going on, guys? Today I'm going to be sharing with you my 2021 to 2022 NFL season predictions, or record predictions to be exact, for the regular season. Today is going to be the NFC North. I'm going to be doing 8 of these, and each one is going to be each division. I'm not going to do all of them in a single video. But yeah, let's get into this. Today is going to be the NFC North. Next video is going to be the AFC North. The NFC North, if you did not know already, contains the Chicago Bears, the Detroit Lions, the Green Bay Packers, and the Minnesota Vikings. So we'll be going in that order because it is alphabetical, so we will start with the Chicago Bears. So the Chicago Bears went 8-8 last season and ended up losing in the wild card round to the Saints, 21-9. I think the Bears have definitely gotten better this offseason, and especially through the draft. If we do look at that Bears draft, they had 7, but and you might be saying, well, that's 1 per round, so that's pretty good. But no, because the first pick was a first-round pick, the next one was a second-round pick, then the rest of the 5 were a 5th-round pick, 3 6th-round picks, and a 7th-round pick. So the last 5 rounds, they were like really late-round selections because they skipped over the 3rd round and the 4th round and went straight to the 5th round because they had no picks in those rounds. The first pick was Justin Fields, a quarterback out of Ohio State, played for Georgia in his first year, got no touches, or little touches, and then went to Ohio State and had a really good career, a really good college career with Ohio State. Taking a look at his stats, all those stats will be up on the screen, but I'm going to be reading the stats from his best year. And that best year is going to be his second year. You guys can look at the rest of the stats up on the screen. 2019, he had 3,273 yards, 41 touchdowns, and 3 picks. Now, to put that into perspective for you, if he threw double the amount of touchdowns, if he threw 82 touchdowns, he would still only throw 6 interceptions. How crazy is that? With the 41-3 touchdown interception ratio, if he threw 82 touchdowns, he would throw only 6 interceptions. That is insane. NFL quarterbacks don't even throw 6 interceptions for 20 touchdowns, much less 80. But yeah, those are like Aaron Rodgers times 5 kind of numbers there. And 3,273 yards. It's not bad. But yeah, the rest of the stats are up on the screen the other 2 years. So, great pick there. I'm kind of surprised that he fell all the way to pick number 11, but he did. And the Bears, when you're the Bears, they've had some pretty bad experience with the quarterback position, so they'll jump on any opportunity that they can get, no questions asked. Next pick was offensive tackle Tevin Jenkins out of Oklahoma State, number 39 overall. Tevin Jenkins could definitely help out that offensive line. If this Bears offensive line had 1 star on it, like a star like a Mike McGlinchey type player, or like a Lyle Collins, or even someone like that who can just help that out. Not even someone like really, really big, like a Zach Martin. Even just a Lyle Collins or Mike McGlinchey type player. I think that this team could do way better. This offense could do way better. Like David Montgomery only had 1,000 yards in the season this year. But I think if they had just one player that is not... Right now, the Bears' offensive line is not that great, but if they could have one just star on that team, on that offensive line, I think David Montgomery could have a much better year, and the quarterback would have much better protection and could have much better stats. In round 5, which is their very next pick, they got another offensive tackle, Larry Borom out of Missouri. I don't really like them going 2 offensive tackles in a row, but they did. I don't really know how to feel about that. It's not a horrible selection, but it's not a really good selection in my opinion. We're just gonna have to see. I don't think Larry Borom will start from day one, but he might later on down the line. The next pick was number 217 overall. They got running back Khalil Herbert. They saw one Khalil do very well, so they said, hey, if that Khalil does well, so will this one. Not really, but, I'll just say that. Out of Kansas and Virginia Tech, I think he played 4 seasons in Kansas and then went over to Virginia Tech in his final year. Looking at Khalil Herbert's stats, though, as I already said, his first 4 years were in Kansas, but I'm just going to put all of his stats up on the screen and read the stats from his best season, which was in Virginia Tech just in 2020. He had 1,183 yards and 8 touchdowns, and even through the air, he was a big factor or a big weapon with 10 receptions for 179 yards and a touchdown, which is pretty decent for a running back. So if he does all that in just an 11-game span, imagine what he could do in a 16-game span like the NFL. I don't really think that the Bears have much interest in Khalil Herbert because they waited 3 picks to get him in the 6th round. But we'll have to see. They do have David Montgomery. I don't think they would start Khalil Herbert, a 6th-round rookie, over David Montgomery, who had a breakout year this past season. They also have Tariq Cohen. They also have Damian Williams that they signed in free agency. I don't think they would pay Damian Williams all that money from free agency just to sit a 6th-round rookie over him. They went out of their way to sign Damian Williams when they didn't even have to. So I don't think that they would start Khalil Herbert over him, but maybe they will. Maybe they'll put him in like a third down running back. Maybe they will. Their next pick was wide receiver Daz Newsome out of North Carolina. Daz Newsome, I think, was a steal for them. All the way down to the 6th round. I'm surprised he lasted that far. I thought maybe he would go in the 3rd or 4th round, but he went all the way down to the 6th. His best year was in 2019. Stats are up on the screen while I'm reading this. But 12 games, 1,018 yards, and 10 touchdowns, and also 3 attempts for 9 rushing yards and no touchdowns. That was 2019, his junior year. And so that's a pretty good year. And the rest of the stats are up on the screen. I already mentioned that. Their next pick, another 6th-round pick, was Thomas Graham, who was another pretty good player. Looking at his stats, in his first year he had 3 interceptions. His next year he also had 3 interceptions, and then in 2019 he had 2 interceptions. And those are pretty good numbers. But then you look that he had a touchdown in 2018 to add on to that, a fumble recovery in 2017, then a forced fumble in 2019. And it doesn't even end there because he had 4 passes defended in 2017, but he also had 18 in 2018 and then 10 in 2019. So that's a lot of passes defended for Thomas Graham Jr. So I think he's a pretty good player, especially since they lost Kyle Fuller. They just released him, and now he plays for the Denver Broncos. They had to for cap space reasons. I'm surprised that they didn't go Thomas Graham Jr. or they didn't go any other cornerback in place of like a Khalil Herbert or Larry Borom. But they went with Thomas Graham in the 6th round. I don't really know whether they had their eye on him or something. They knew that he wouldn't go very far. They drafted him in the 6th round because he knew that he would go there. I don't really know. I haven't really heard. But they got Thomas Graham Jr. in the 6th round. I probably would have gone for a corner a little bit earlier, but Thomas Graham Jr. is still really good. And then in the 7th round, they got a defensive tackle, Kairos Tonga. Just like Khalil Herbert, defensive tackle is not a really big need for them. And Kairos Tonga, he didn't put up horrible stats, but they weren't bad. They weren't bad, but they weren't super great. In his first year, he had 4 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. In his 2018, he had 4.5 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. In 2019, he had 4 tackles for loss and 1 sack. In 2020, he had 3.5 tackles for loss and also 3.5 sacks. No picks, but he did have 5 passes defended in 2020. He also had a forced fumble in 2017 and 2018. So, not bad for Mr. Kairos Tonga. I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. I'm sort of confident that I am. Looking at that offense, though, Justin Fields obviously is there. The Bears did sign Andy Dalton out of free agency. It's kind of scummy of them because they said that Andy Dalton would be starting, and then they drafted Justin Fields. I don't think that they would sit Justin Fields behind Andy Dalton for a year. I just don't see the reason because, one, I think Justin Fields is definitely better than Andy Dalton. And second, even though Andy Dalton does have much more experience than Justin Fields, Andy Dalton just still didn't put up good stats. It's like saying Mitchell Trubisky is more experienced than Justin Fields, so let's put Mitchell Trubisky in front of Justin Fields for a year. And Mitchell Trubisky plays for the Bills now, but just an example. And let's put Tim Tebow in front of Justin Fields because Tim Tebow has more experience. You're just not going to do that. Andy Dalton, he does have the experience, but he's still not that good. Justin Fields is definitely better. Maybe they might put Andy Dalton in for a few weeks just for Justin Fields to learn the ropes. But after that, I would probably put in Justin Fields. I'll probably just start Justin Fields from day one, to be honest. A wide receiver, they have Allen Robinson, Darnell Mooney. They drafted Daz Newsome. Allen Robinson is 27. That's still a pretty young age, a decently young age. And he's still really, really good. So great receiver to have. Wouldn't say that he's a top 5 receiver, but most definitely a top 10 receiver. Darnell Mooney was a 6th-round selection for the Bears, and he put up 600-plus yards. To be exact, he put up 631 yards and also 4 touchdowns. And rushing, he also had 4 rushes for 20 yards. So he also had a fumble, but, everyone fumbles at least once, don't they? If you get enough touches, which Darnell Mooney gets a lot of touches. Daz Newsome, I would probably put him at number 3 receiver. A tight end, they have Jimmy Graham, but Jimmy Graham is definitely getting up there in age. He is 34 years old. Maybe the Bears cut him. I would probably do that. I don't know. He put up 456 yards and 8 touchdowns. While their younger player, who was a rookie last year, Cole Kmet, he had 28 receptions for 243 yards and 2 touchdowns. So pretty much half the amount of yards, almost. Or actually, I think it's more than half the amount of yards that Jimmy Graham put up and quarter the amount of touchdowns. I would probably start Cole Kmet because Cole Kmet sat behind Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham is more experienced, but now that Cole Kmet has that 1-year experience, and he's been averaging about 2 receptions per game, I would probably put Cole Kmet in as the starter in 2021 so that he can get some more stats in. The offensive line, I already talked about them. So let's move on to the defense. Definitely the strength of their team, I would say. The front 7 is probably the more stronger part of that defense, or maybe even the stronger part of their team. With, obviously, they have Khalil Mack, who is a force to be reckoned with. They have Roquan Smith, who is a young star. They have Akeem Hicks there. They have Eddie Goldman there. Eddie Goldman is okay. But looking at Eddie Goldman's stats, it's it's not great stats, but it's not bad. In 2019, that was his most recent. He had 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss. But his best stat, or his best, season was in 2015, which is his first season, when he had 4.5 sacks and 5 tackles for loss. So probably an under average or below average player, but still a decent player to have. They have Bilal Nichols on that team. In 2019, he had 27 tackles, but that's pretty much it. That is it. And in 2020, though, he had 40 tackles and 5 sacks. Also an interception that he took for 7 yards. So Bilal Nichols, pretty good player. They have Akeem Hicks on that team, former Saint. Looking at his stats, he's getting up there in age. He's 31 years old, so that's pretty old. Doesn't have a single year with double-digit sacks. This past season, he had 49 combined tackles and 3.5 sacks. But his best year was probably in 2017, or definitely was in 2017, when he had 54 combined tackles and 8.5 sacks. Doesn't have a single pick recorded, but he's a defensive end, so you wouldn't really expect him to get an interception. Khalil Mack, obviously on that team, traded for Khalil Mack a few years ago from the Raiders. Khalil Mack had a great year this past season, but with 50 combined tackles for 9 sacks and an interception to go along with it. In his first year with the Bears in 2018, he had 47 tackles, 12.5 sacks, and an interception. And his best year was with the Raiders in 2015. That was his second year in the NFL, when he had 77 combined tackles for 15 sacks and nothing else. No interceptions. Roquan Smith, a young player and a young star, and he's a rising star. Looking at his stats, he's only been in the league for 3 years, but he's been putting up pretty good stats for a linebacker. In 2020, just this past season, he had 4 sacks, which I think is pretty good for a middle linebacker, and also 2 interceptions. In 2019, he had 2 sacks and an interception, and in 2018, he had 5 sacks and an interception. So 5 sacks, that's pretty good for a linebacker. He also had 139 tackles in 2020, 101 in 2019, and 121 in 2018. Those are some pretty good numbers for Roquan Smith. They're probably their future linebacker if Roquan Smith doesn't want to leave them at any point. Moving on from their front 7 to their secondary, Kyle Fuller is not around anymore. He plays for the Denver Broncos. Jalen Johnson is the new cornerback in town, or not really new because he played last season. Last season, he didn't record a single interception, but he did have a whopping 15 passes defended and a tackle for loss as well, which is pretty good for a cornerback. 1 tackle for loss and 15 passes defended. 15 is a lot. They also drafted that Thomas Graham guy that I already talked about. They have Eddie Jackson at that free safety position. Looking at Eddie Jackson's stats, just this past year, he had no sacks and no interceptions, but he did have 82 combined tackles. In 2018, that was his best season. Well, not in terms of tackles, that was his worst season, but in 2018, he had 51 combined tackles, which is not horrible, but it's whatever. It's whatever. He had 1 sack in that year, and he had 6 interceptions, 2 of which went for touchdowns. So his stats are going to be up there on the screen. All these player stats are going to be up there on the screen. So a very good player, and this team, it's pretty good. So I would probably give them a 10-6 record. They're going to make the playoffs, I would assume. So I think 10-6 is pretty fair for them. Or maybe give them 11-5 if Kyle Fuller was still around. They still have a pretty good team. The next team up on the list is the Detroit Lions. They're next alphabetically. The Detroit Lions, they're a mess of a team. They're probably the worst team, or they definitely are the worst team in the NFC North. They pretty much need help at every single position. They need all the help that they can get. Looking at their draft, they drafted Penei Sewell in the first round. Maybe I would have gone offensive line, but Penei Sewell is still a pretty good draft pick. Probably the best offensive line prospect in the draft. He's 6'5", 331, so he is insane. He's massive. But yeah, not much to say about Penei Sewell other than that he is an amazing player and could definitely help out that defensive line or the offensive line of that Detroit Lions team. In the second round, they drafted Levi Onwuzurike. I don't know whether I pronounced that right or not. He's a defensive tackle from Washington. We will be looking at his stats. They will be up on the screen. I'm just going to read his best season. It was in 2018 when he recorded 34 total tackles, 6.5 tackles for a loss, and also 3 sacks. That was his best year. And you can read the rest of his stats. They're up on the screen, as I already mentioned. Their next pick was in the third round. They got Alim McNeil, who's yet another defensive tackle. He's a little bit shorter than Levi. He is 6'2", but he's also 27 pounds heavier. He is 317 pounds. Alim McNeil, I think he's probably better than Levi. And looking at his stats, in his first year, he recorded 24 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, and 3.5 sacks. In his next year, he recorded 28 tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, and 5.5 sacks. And in 2020, 4.5 tackles for loss and 1 sack, and also an interception with 25 total tackles. He also has a fumble recovery in 2020, and also a forced fumble in both 2018 and in 2020. He also has 3 passes defended in 2018, and 2 in 2019. So Alim McNeil is probably the better one out of the two. So I've maybe interchanged them, but I don't really like them going with 2 defensive tackles in a row, because I think they should be more focusing on not their defensive line, but pretty much everything else. Maybe linebacker, definitely linebacker, because it's pretty weak for them. Linebacker, receiver. They did draft a receiver later in the draft, though. A pick number 38, also in the third round, they got Ifeatu Melifonwu, yet another player with a hard-to-pronounce name, Levi Onwuzurike, and now him. Looking at Ifeatu Melifonwu's stats, he is a cornerback, or a DB. In 2018, he had pretty much nothing other than a tackle for a loss and 14 total tackles, but he also had 6 passes defended. In 2019, though, he recorded his first interception. He recorded 2 interceptions in total in that year. He had 1 tackle for a loss and also 20 total tackles and 7 passes defended. And in 2020, he had 1 interception, 1 sack, 3 total tackles for loss, 54 tackles in total, and 6 passes defended. So Ifeatu Melifonwu is not bad. In round 4, this is the wide receiver that they've drafted. It is Amon-Ra St. Brown. He is the brother of Equanimous St. Brown. But looking at Amon-Ra St. Brown's stats, I'm going to just be reading his best season, which was in 2019, when he got 77 receptions for 1,042 yards and 6 touchdowns. And he also had 7 attempts for 60 rushing yards on the ground, with also 1 touchdown. And the rest of the stats are there. Pick number 8, which is the next pick. Amon-Ra St. Brown was the 7th pick of the 4th round, and now Derek Barnes is the 8th pick of the 4th round. Derek Barnes is a linebacker, which is definitely a need for the Detroit Lions. But looking at his stats, I'm going to read his best season, which was definitely in 2019, when he had 63 total tackles. He had 92 in 2018. But 63 total tackles in 2019, 11 tackles for loss, and 7.5 sacks. Also, 2 passes defended, a fumble recovery, and a forced fumble. In the next pick, which is their 7th round pick, they went from 4th all the way to 7th. But they picked Jamar Jefferson. I think running back is probably a need for them. And they did draft DeAndre Swift, who only had 500 rushing yards. He was just a rookie, though, so maybe you want to give him a chance. But Jamar Jefferson, his stats are looking really good. In 2018, he had 12 games with 1,380 yards and 12 touchdowns, and also had 25 receptions for 147 yards. No touchdowns receiving, but still. But in 2019, he had 9 games with 685 yards and 8 touchdowns. And then in 2020, he had 858 yards and 7 touchdowns, but only in 6 games. So in his last year, he would have been on par for 2,000 plus yards if he had played 16 games, which is the amount of games in a regular season. So Jamar Jefferson, I'd say he's a pretty good pick. Overall, I'd rate this Lions draft an A or a B plus. A or A minus. I would say A or A minus. And the Bears, I didn't grade their draft, but I would grade the Bears draft an A. But that was their draft. Looking at the actual Detroit Lions roster, a quarterback, they don't have Matthew Stafford anymore. They now have Jared Goff at quarterback, or Jared Goof, as I like to call him, because he's not that great. Jared Goff, he's no Matthew Stafford. Imagine how Matthew Stafford, he's a great quarterback, and he's a great leader, and they were still struggling with him. So I don't know how they're going to do with a worse quarterback in Jared Goff. The actual details of that trade are that the Rams receive Matthew Stafford, and the Lions, in return, receive Jared Goff, a 3rd-round draft pick from 2021, which they already used in the draft, and they also got a 1st-round draft pick from 2022 and a 1st-round draft pick from 2023. I would probably say that the winners of this draft are the Lions, because not only did they get a quarterback, I mean, it's not a very good quarterback, but it's a quarterback who they can use because he's still young, sort of. But they also got a 3rd-round draft pick in 2021, which they used, as I already said. They also got 2 1st-round draft picks from 2022 and 2023. Well, the Rams, all they got was Matthew Stafford, who is a good quarterback, but he is still old. Or he's not old, but in football terms, he is pretty old. He is 33 years old, so yeah. That's pretty old in football terms. A running back, I already talked about DeAndre Swift and how Jamar Jefferson. A wide receiver, though, they lost Kenny Golladay and they lost Marvin Jones, and they signed Tyrell Williams. Tyrell Williams, he's not going to solve all their problems. They still need a wide receiver. Tyrell Williams is not the answer. I don't think. We're going to have to wait and find out, I guess. Tyrell Williams' best season was in 2016 when he had 69 receptions for 1,059 yards and 7 TDs. In 2019, which is his most earliest year, he had 42 receptions for 651 yards and 6 touchdowns. So he only had one 1,000-yard season, which was in 2016, and has never had more than 7 touchdowns in a season. So Tyrell Williams, looking at his stats from the Raiders and the Chargers, he's just not the one. He's just not the answer. They also got Geronimo Allison, who was a former player of their rivals, the Green Bay Packers. And Geronimo Allison, he's no Marvin Jones, and he's certainly no Kenny Golladay. Geronimo Allison, he was like a number 2 or number 3 receiver for the Green Bay Packers. His best year was in 2018 when he had 20 receptions for 303 yards and 2 TDs. Never got over that 303-yard mark and never got over the 2 touchdowns. And his longest career reception was 72 yards, though, which is pretty good. But we don't really care about that. All we care as the fans is whether he got a good amount of yards and a good amount of scores. That's all we care about. If he got 72-yard gain from the 1 yard line, then if it's not a touchdown and they ended up throwing an interception to end the drive, we don't really care, do we? It was cool to watch. They also have Brashad Perriman, who has played for a hefty amount of teams in his young career. Only has 5 years in his career, but he has played for the Ravens, the Browns, the Bucks, and the Jets, which is 4 teams in total in just 6 years. His best year was in 2019, which was his most receptions he's ever had in a season, the most yards he's ever had in a season, and the most touchdowns he's ever had in a season, with 36 receptions for 645 yards and 6 TDs, and that year was with the Buccaneers. Brashad Perriman, there's not really much you can say about him. But that's the offense. They also have T.J. Hawkinson at tight end, who was a rookie 2 years ago. He was the rookie before the Joe Burrow draft. That was when Kyler Murray went number 1 overall. He was the rookie in that draft. So he will be a third-year player going into the 2021 season. His rookie year, he had 32 receptions for 367 yards and 2 touchdowns. But in 2020, he was selected to the Pro Bowl, and he had pretty good numbers with 67 receptions for 723 yards and 6 touchdowns, which is pretty good for a tight end. So T.J. Hawkinson is a good tight end to have, and he's still young. Yeah, that's the offense. On the defensive side, it's not much better. I don't even think it is better. The defensive line is probably, the strength of the defense, if not the entire team in general. But looking at that defense, a defensive line, they have Michael Brockers, they have Alim McNeil and Levi, who we already talked about. They also have Romeo Okwara. He's also playing with his brother, who's playing the same position as he is, Julian Okwara. But Julian Okwara is the second string, and Romeo Okwara is the starter. Looking at Michael Brocker's stats, not too great, but not bad either. Michael Brockers is old, unfortunately, kind of. In 2020, he had 5 sacks and 51 combined tackles, nothing else really. And that was probably his best season. You could also make the argument that 2013 was his best season, but he had 5 less tackles with 46 and half a sack more, with 5.5. I don't know, which one is his better season? I don't really know. Maybe they're even. I can't really tell. Does 5 extra tackles make up for the half a sack that he didn't get? I don't really know, because it's half a sack, and I don't really know if the person he shared that sack with would have gotten the quarterback down on his own. If you know what I'm saying. I don't really know. I kind of worded that a little bit confusingly. They also have Romeo Okwara, who had his best season definitely this year when he actually got double-digit sacks. Isn't that crazy to say? He actually had a good statistic, and he plays for the Lions. Oh my goodness. He had the most tackles he's ever gotten with 44. He also had 10 sacks, 10.0 sacks, double-digit sacks. Amazing, just amazing. And that is really good. I'm kind of surprised that he did have that. In the secondary, or not even the secondary, at linebackers, they have Jelani Tavai. I'm just going to put his stats up on the screen so that you can read them. They're not that great. Jamie Collins, he's pretty good. Maybe he's a future Hall of Famer. I don't really know. Jamie Collins, looking at his season from 2020, he had 101 combined tackles for 1 sack and a pick. And his best year was probably in 2019, just the year before this one with the Patriots, with 81 combined tackles and 7 sacks and 3 interceptions, and also a touchdown. One of those interceptions went for a pick. I guess, or a touchdown. But yeah, Jamie Collins, he's still pretty good, but he's still old. You can't forget about that. Age does matter. Because at one age, at one point, they're going to start regressing, and I think Jamie Collins has already hit that point. They also have Trey Flowers. Trey Flowers is not bad by any means. This past season in 2020, he had 22 combined tackles and 2 interceptions. 2 sacks, no interceptions. He's never had a single interception in his career. His best season was in 2018 when he had 57 combined tackles and 7.5 sacks. So, yeah. Decent player, a good player to have, and he's decently young as well. I said decent a lot of times. In the secondary, they have Armani Oruwariye, Quinton Dunbar. They have Jeff Okudah as well. Jeff Okudah was kind of a disappointment. He was a first-round draft pick for the Lions in the past draft, in the 2020 draft, and didn't really have great stats. Kind of a draft bust. I mean, you can't really say that after just his rookie year. But he only had 1 interception and 47 tackles, which is not that great. They also have Quinton Dunbar. Just going to put his stats up on the screen there. They also have Will Harris as strong safety and Tracy Walker at free safety. They also have that rookie corner with Ifeatu Melifonwu, who's their second string. They also have some dude named Corn Elder. Great name. Yeah, not much else to say about this team. I'm going to say that they're going to go 4-12. They went 5-11 last season, and I would think that they would be lucky if they went the same record. I mean, they could, but I don't really think that they will. I think they're going to go 4-12. I'm sorry, Lions fans, if I'm upsetting you, but I think that's just the case. The next team on the list is my favorite team, the Green Bay Packers. They went 13-3 last season, and they got a bye week, and then they lost in the NFC Conference Championship because of the play calling. Unfortunately, Aaron Rodgers is probably not going to be on the Green Bay Packers next season, which could definitely be a big hit. It could definitely bring down the record by a significant amount. By significant, I mean like two games, which is pretty big. But I don't know why. I have some ideas of maybe why. I don't really know, but maybe it's because one, they keep holding back Aaron Rodgers from even winning a Super Bowl or even winning an NFC Championship game because Aaron Rodgers, Hall of Famer, only has one NFC Conference Championship win in his entire life, or his entire career, and I guess his entire life as well. And that NFC Conference Championship win was the NFC Conference Championship before they beat the Pittsburgh Steelers in the Super Bowl. So, I don't know, it's kind of crazy to think. And they also keep, not giving Aaron Rodgers any weapons, and they drafted Jordan Love in the 2020 NFL Draft in the first round, and they don't get Aaron Rodgers any offensive weapons, like a good receiver or a good tight end. And they also signed Blake Bortles in the 2021 free agency just to add on to that. But I do think that Jordan Love is probably going to be the starter for the 2021 NFL season. That is, if the Packers don't go on and sign a new quarterback. I hope not. But Jordan Love, it's kind of weird to do this, but I am going to show you his stats, even though he's not a rookie. In his first year, he threw for 1,600 yards, just about 8 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. But his best season was in 2018, when he threw for 3,567 yards, 32 touchdowns to 6 picks, which is a great touchdown to interception ratio. And the rest of his stats are visible on the screen for you. But yeah, Jordan Love, he could be a quarterback of the future. I mean, that's just for time to tell. It's going to be exciting to see him play in the 2021 NFL season. I hope that he will. Running back, they have Aaron Jones, best running back in the NFL. I mean, not best, but top 10, up there, but definitely not the best. Looking at his stats, this past season, arguably his best season, but I think 2019 was his best season. 2020, he had 201 attempts, 1,104 yards, 5.5 average yards per carry, and 9 touchdowns. 2019, I'm almost certain that was his better year with 236 attempts, 1,084 yards. So less yards and a less average yards per carry with 4.6, but he had 7 more touchdowns with 16. Every single year of his career, he's had 5.5 average yards per carry, except for 2019. So yeah, A.J. Dillon is also going to be on that team. He's the backup running back. So A.J. Dillon, pretty good stats in college. And by pretty good, I mean they're actually really good. You can see him right now on the screen. But even in the NFL, a backup running back, he averaged 5.3 yards per carry, and he had 46 attempts for 242 yards and 2 touchdowns. So decent backup running back numbers, and definitely the yards per carry were pretty good for a backup. I'll probably say that a backup running back would have like 3.5 average yards per carry, probably because they don't really use them that much, and they're going to be like third down situations or like goal line situations. That's when they would bring them out, or when the running back starts getting tired. A wide receiver, they have Devontae Adams, one of the best running backs, or not running backs, but wide receivers in the NFL. Top five, maybe top 3. I think he might be the third best behind DeAndre Hopkins and Stephon Diggs. I can't really think of anyone else. Looking at Devontae Adams' stats, though, this past season he had a lot of touchdowns. Might be up there in records. They may be top 10. Definitely not the record. The record is Randy Moss with 23. But Devontae Adams, 1,374 yards and 18 touchdowns on 115 receptions. A great number 1 receiver to have, obviously. The rest of the stats are on that screen for you. Definitely the most touchdowns he's ever had in his career, but not the most yards, because the most yards was in 2018 when he had 1,386 yards. At second receiver, they have Amari Rodgers. Let's take a look at that draft, because Amari Rodgers was a rookie that they drafted. So looking at that draft, in the first round, they got Eric Stokes, a DB, which is definitely a big need for them, or not all DB positions because of Adrian Amos and Darnell Savage, but cornerback specifically, they got Eric Stokes, who's a cornerback out of Georgia. He put up some not very good numbers in his first 2 seasons, because he had 0 interceptions in both of his first 2 years. But then in his last year, he had 4 interceptions and 4 passes defended. In his first 2 seasons, he had 9 passes defended and a forced fumble in 2019. And he also had 20 tackles in 2020. So 2020 was definitely his best year, or probably because he had 4 interceptions. But in his first 2 years, he also had 9 passes defended, which is pretty good. So definitely a good cornerback. And he was the best cornerback when they were drafting him. So, great pick. In the second round, they got an offensive lineman, Josh Myers, one of the very many that they drafted in this. But they got Josh Myers, pretty good center. The Chargers keep stealing the Packers' offensive lineman. They got Brian Bulaga in 2019 at the start of the 2020 season. In 2020 at the start of that season, they got Brian Bulaga. And now they have Corey Linsley as well. So Josh Myers could be the replacement In round 3, they got Amari Rodgers, who is a wide receiver. They just said, hey, Aaron, we got a Rodgers. But Amari Rodgers, he's 5'9", but he's 212 pounds. He's like built like a bowling ball. He's kind of like built like a running back. But looking at Amari Rodgers' stats, in his freshman year, he played with Clemson for his entire college career. But in that freshman year, I mean, not great, 19 receptions for 123 yards in 12 games. He also had 3 rushes for -9 yards and 0 touchdowns. Because you can't really score touchdowns when you're running backwards, can you? In his next year, he had 15 receptions for 575 yards. But his best season was in 2020, when he had 77 receptions for 1,020 yards and 7 touchdowns. No rushes. I mean, he's a wide receiver. You don't really expect him to get a rush, but he did get rushes in each of his last years. So Amari Rodgers is definitely a good receiver. Could be the number 2 receiver. He probably will be. In round 4, they got Royce Newman, who's another offensive lineman. 6'5", 310. He's humongous. Not really much I can say about these offensive linemen, other than he's pretty good. TJ Slayton was the round 5 pick. He's a defensive lineman. Defensive lineman is kind of a need for them. But let's take a look at TJ Slayton's stats. In his first year, he recorded 0 sacks and 1.5 tackles for loss. No picks, no forced fumbles, no fumble recoveries. But his best year was probably in 2019, when he had 29 total tackles, which is not the most of his career. The most of his, or at least his college career. The most of his college career was in 2020 when he had 38. But in 2019, he also had 3.5 tackles for a loss and also 2 sacks. He had an interception in 2018, which is kind of cool. The next pick after TJ Slayton was a cornerback in the same round, Shamar Jean-Charles. They got yet another cornerback. I don't know if cornerback is that much of a need for them, but they got another cornerback. Looking at Shamar Jean-Charles' stats, his first year, he didn't have a single interception, not a single sack, not a single tackle for a loss, none of that, but he did have 2 passes defended, which is okay, I guess. He had 10 total tackles. And Shamar Jean-Charles, not really that great, but his best season was in 2020 when he had 35 total tackles, which is not the most of his career. His most was 45 in 2019, but he also had a tackle for a loss in 2020, an interception, and 16 passes defended. Shamar Jean-Charles, not a bad player. And the pick after Shamar Jean-Charles, round 6, when they picked another offensive lineman, Cole Van Lanen. I'll go to the next pick. Their next pick was Isaiah McDuffie. Kind of a funny name, but looking at those stats, they're up on the screen for you. In his first year, he recorded a total of no interceptions, no sacks, and no tackles for a loss, and only 8 total tackles. But he did have a pass defended, which I guess is okay. His best year was probably 2020, when he got 53 total tackles, or 107 total tackles. 54 of them were solo, and 53 of them were assists. 6.5 total tackles for a loss, 3.5 total sacks, and 1 interception. So pretty good season. He also had a fumble recovery in that season. And the rest of the stats are there for you to see. And the last pick of their draft was Kylan Hill, a running back, which is not a big need for them because they already have Aaron Jones and they already have A.J. Dillon to back him up. But I guess they could pick him in the 7th round. It's a 7th rounder. What are you really gonna do? His best year was definitely in 2019, I would say, when he got 242 attempts for 1,350 yards and 10 touchdowns with a 5.6 average yards per carry. And through the air, he also had 18 receptions for 180 yards and a touchdown. So So pretty good year for Highland Hill. That was their draft. They got a lot of offensive linemen, so good for them in that case. They also got 2 good corners, and they also got a running back, a decent running back, and of course, they got a wide receiver, which is definitely going to help them out. So yeah, they have Robert Tonyan at tight end. He got 500 yards this year, a breakout year for him. To be exact, he got 586 yards and 11 touchdowns, which is definitely very good. In his past year, in 2019, he had only 100 yards and 1 touchdown. So Robert Tonyan, definitely good. And he's only 27, which is not a bad age to be. But moving on to their defense, definitely the weak point of their team. Their offense is definitely better. But looking at that defense, their best players are Jair Alexander, Zadarius Smith, and Kenny Clark. Jair Alexander, interceptions-wise, not super great, but where he does the most damage is in the pass deflections area. Interceptions-wise, he had only 1 in 2020, 2 in 2019, and 1 in 2018, which is not bad at all, but it's not really that great. But he had a lot of pass deflections with 11 in 2018, 17 in 2019, and 13 in 2020, which is a lot. But kind of sucks that he doesn't have many picks. Zadarius Smith, one of the best outside linebackers in the league, and I don't really think that's a stretch. This year, he had 12 and a half sacks. No picks, unfortunately, but he doesn't have a single interception his entire career. He also had 52 combined tackles. In 2019, that was definitely his best year, with 55 combined tackles, 13 and a half sacks. So Zadarius Smith, definitely very good. I feel like I'm saying definitely a lot of times. They also have Kenny Clark, who, in my opinion, might be overrated, but he is not bad by any means. He had 2 sacks in 2020 with 42 combined tackles, and his best year was 2019 when he had 62 combined tackles and 6 sacks. Not a single interception in his career, but he is a defensive tackle. They also have Kingsley Keke. They have Preston Smith. Preston Smith had a great year last year, but this year he took a very big step back and might be at a risk of losing his job, possibly. In 2019, he had 12 sacks and an interception with 56 combined tackles. And in 2020, he had 42 combined tackles and only 4 sacks with no interceptions. Preston Smith, he has a lot of interceptions in his career with 5. Which is very good for an outside linebacker, I would say, I think. Dean Lowry, they also have him. Kingsley Keke, already said him. I'm going to put Dean Lowry's stats up right now. And now Kingsley Keke. But yeah, they have Adrian Amos at that strong safety spot. He used to play with the rival Bears. Now he plays for the Packers. He had 2 interceptions 3 consecutive years, 2018, 2019, and 2020. 2019 was probably his best year with 84 combined tackles, 1 sack, and 2 interceptions. You could maybe make the argument that 2020 was better with 83 combined tackles, 2 sacks, and 2 interceptions. I guess 2020 was probably the better year, even though he did have 1 less sack, or 1 less tackle. He had 1 more sack. So probably 2020 was the better year because sacks are better than tackles, right? But they also have Darnell Savage, second-year player, and he is a savage, recording 4 interceptions this year. That is very good. He only had 2 in 2019, and I say only, that's still pretty good. In 2020, he had 75 combined tackles, 1 sack, and 4 interceptions. But yeah, this team isn't bad. I'm going to say that maybe they're going to go 11-5. They are going to lose Aaron Rodgers. They haven't quite done that yet, but I do think that he will be gone by the start of the 2020 season. I think that Aaron Rodgers is going to be going to the Denver Broncos. That's just what I hear. But yeah, I think 11-5 is pretty fair. The final team on the list is going to be the Minnesota Vikings. I was kind of surprised to see that they did as badly as they did. They went 10-6 in 2019, and then they went back by 3 games in 2020, winning 3 less games, then losing 3 more games. They went 7-9. So I was kind of surprised to see that. But let's just jump right in and look at their draft. They got Christian Darrisaw with pick number 23 overall. Yeah, I can't really say much about these offensive linemen other than the fact that he's one of the best prospects in the draft. Out of all the positions, really. But going on to their next one, it was a 3rd-round draft pick, so they skipped the 2nd round. They didn't have any picks in that round, but they got Kellen Mond, a quarterback. So I guess they're kind of starting to lose hope on Kirk Cousins, who I do think is pretty underrated. But yeah, he is kind of old. He's getting on up there in age, and I don't know if he's regressing stat-wise, but yeah, 32 is still a pretty old age for a quarterback at least. This past season, he got 4,265 yards, 35 touchdowns, and 13 picks. So not a bad touchdown-interception ratio, but still 13 interceptions is kind of high. In 2019, he had 3,603 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 6 picks. So he did grow from 2019 to 2020, but in 2018, he had a much better year than 2020, I would probably say, because he got more yards, a little bit less touchdowns, but he also had less interceptions because he had 4,298 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 10 picks. All in all, I think that 2016 was probably his best year with 4,917 yards, only 25 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. So Kirk Cousins, I guess you would look to replace him, and I'm happy that they didn't get a quarterback in the 1st round. Actually, I don't even think that there were any quarterbacks that they would draft in the 1st round. But yeah, Kellen Mond, let's just take a look at those stats. In his first year, in his freshman year, he recorded 1,375 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 6 picks. His best year was in 2018 when he got 3,107 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. So a pretty good touchdown-to-interception ratio. Moving on to their next selection, they got Chaz Surratt. Interesting player because he played quarterback for 2 years and then played linebacker for 2 years in college. In 2017 and 2018, he was playing quarterback, and then in 2019 he moved on to linebacker, and then in 2020 he also played linebacker. And he also, while he was playing quarterback, got a tackle. So that's kind of weird. I don't really follow college football that much. In 2017, at quarterback, I don't know why I'm reading this because he's a linebacker, but I will. He got 1,342 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 3 picks. Good for Chaz. But at linebacker, I would say that 2019 was his better year. He had a total of 6.5 sacks, and he also had an interception with 15 tackles for loss. And the rest of the stats are on there for you. He also had 2 passes defended and also a forced fumble and a fumble recovery. Their next selection after Chaz Surratt is Wyatt Davis, another guard, and not really much I can say once again. But Wyatt Davis is a pretty good offensive lineman and could definitely help out that defensive, or should I say offensive line. Their next pick was a defensive end, Patrick Jones, yet another 3rd-round draft pick. Their last 3rd-round draft pick. But they got Patrick Jones, 90th overall, a defensive end out of Pittsburgh. Looking at his stats, in his freshman year, he recorded no interceptions, but he had half a sack, a tackle for loss, and 7 total tackles. Never had a single interception, but he is a defensive lineman. His best year was in 2020. He got 42 total tackles, 12.5 tackles for loss, and 9 sacks. Also 3 passes defended and a fumble recovery. He had 4 forced fumbles in 2019. and the rest of the stats are there for you. The next pick for them, moving on from third rounders and going on to fourth rounders, they drafted a running back, Keen Wangwu. Keen Wangwu? I don't really know how to pronounce that name, but we will take a look at his stats. Running back isn't a big need for them, but they drafted him. His best year, and one of the worst running backs that I've looked at, but I would say his best year was in 2020 when he got 61 attempts for 339 yards and 4 touchdowns, and 3 receptions for 22 yards and no touchdowns. So Kini Wangu. Or Nuwangu. Kini Nuwangu. Not really a great pick. Fourth round draft pick, they got California safety Cameron Bynum. Safety is kind of a need for them. But looking at the stats, he had 2 interceptions in 2017, 2 in 2018, 1 in 2019, and 1 in 2020. And passes defended, he had 8 in 2017, 9 in 2018, 9 in 2019, and 2 in 2020. And sack-wise, he had half in 2017 and half in 2018. And the stats are there for you, as once again, they are. The next pick that they had was another fourth round draft pick. They had a lot of draft picks. It's kind of insane. They drafted Janarius Robinson, a defensive end out of Florida State. Defensive end is kind of a need for them. A little bit. Looking at Janarius Robinson's stats, I'm just going to read his best year, which is 2019, when he had 48 total tackles, 9 tackles for a loss, and 3 sacks. Also, 1 pass defended, 2 fumble recoveries, and 2 forced fumbles. So, decent stats from Janarius Robinson. Their next pick was a 5th rounder. They got a wide receiver out of Ohio, Emir Smith-Marset. Wide receiver, not a big need for them, but he could play number 3 receiver, possibly. Maybe. But it's a 5th round. What are you really going to select? Again, it's a late round draft pick. His best year was in 2019 when he had 13 games, 44 receptions, 722 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Also, 11 attempts and 108 yards rushing. And also 3 touchdowns. So, yeah. Pretty good stats there. And the rest of his seasons in college were okay. The pick after Emir Smith-Marset was Zach Davidson, a tight end out of Central Missouri. It's also kind of interesting because he was also a punter in college. So another player who played 2 positions in college. Looking at the stats at receiving, though, his best year was in 2019 when he had 40 receptions for 894 yards and 15 touchdowns. So very good season there. Their next pick was Jalen Twyman, a defensive tackle, another one out of Pittsburgh, another player out of Pittsburgh. Looking at Jalen Twyman's stats, in his first year, he had a total of 0 interceptions, but he didn't have a single interception, half a sack, and 1.5 tackles for loss. But in 2019, he had 41 total tackles, 12 tackles for a loss, and 10.5 sacks, with also 2 passes defended. So an insane season for him. Jalen Twyman, pretty good selection. And that was their last pick. Looking at their team, though, I already talked about Kirk Cousins and Kellen Mond. At running back, they have Dalvin Cook, top 5 running back. Definitely very good. Just this past season, he had a total of 1,557 yards and 16 touchdowns, averaging 5 yards per carry. Definitely his best season. Also, 312 attempts. At receiver, they don't have Stephon Diggs anymore, but they do have Justin Jefferson, who's a great selection for them. He had exactly 1,400 yards, 7 total touchdowns, and 88 receptions. Adam Thielen, and the number 2, tight end role, not bad. He had 925 yards and 14 total touchdowns at 74 receptions. So a very good year for Adam Thielen. But his best year was in 2018 when he had 113 receptions for 1,373 yards and 9 touchdowns. Moving on to tight end, they have Kyle Rudolph. His best year was in 2016 when he had 83 receptions for 840 yards and 7 touchdowns. But just this past year, he had 28 receptions for 334 yards and 1 touchdown. They also have Irv Smith Jr. behind him, and this past season, he had 30 receptions for 365 yards and 5 touchdowns. And in his rookie year, he had 36 receptions for 311 yards and 2 touchdowns. Offensive line, already talked about them. It's kind of subpar. It's not really that great of an offensive line. Moving on from offense and moving on to defense, Mike Zimmer said that this was his worst defense he's ever played with, and it wasn't that great. They have Danielle Hunter, who's a great young superstar. Looking at his stats, he has been putting up some insane numbers this season, or not this season, but in 2019, he had 14.5 sacks with 70 combined tackles. But that wasn't his best year. His best year was in 2018 when he had 72 combined tackles with 14.5 sacks. And in 2016, he had 56 combined tackles with 12.5 sacks. Not a single interception for him yet, but he is a defensive end. Michael Pierce is not a bad player, I guess. You can look at his stats right here, up on the screen for you guys. They also have Dalvin Tomlinson at defensive tackle. They got him out of free agency. Not bad numbers for him, too. I'm going to switch to his stats. And a linebacker, it's kind of rough. They have Nick Vigil. His stats are on the screen now. They also have Anthony Barr on the other side of him. I would maybe put Chaz Surratt over Nick Vigil. I don't know what they're going to do. They have Eric Kendricks, a middle linebacker. Great stats for him, especially in 2020 when he had 107 combined tackles and 3 interceptions. But in 2015, he had 4 sacks from middle linebacker. I don't know how. That's amazing. Those are some pretty good numbers. Cornerback, they have Patrick Peterson, Jeff Gladney. Patrick Peterson, he's not in his prime anymore by any means. Not playing with the Minnesota Vikings. Patrick Peterson's best year was in 2012 when he had 55 combined tackles and 7 interceptions. He's been playing all the way since 2011. That's already enough to tell you that he's old. Not old, but, in football terms, he's old. He's 30. Just this past season, though, in 2020, he had 61 combined tackles and 3 interceptions, which doesn't seem bad, but he's been getting burned a lot. In 2020, he only had 8 passes defended, and I say only, but it's not super great. In 2012, he had 16 passes defended, and he also had 5 fumble recoveries. They also have Jeff Gladney, who was a rookie cornerback for them last year. Looking at his stats, he was kind of a disappointment. He had 3 passes defended and a forced fumble, but not a single interception. So, yeah, definitely a disappointment. He had 7 tackles for loss, though. Meh. Jeff Gladney, not a really good player, not a really good corner. Hopefully he could step things up this year. Hopefully for Minnesota Vikings fans. They have Harrison Smith, one of the best safeties in the NFL. He had 5 interceptions this year, and also half a sack. But that was not really his best year. His best year was in 2014 when he had 92 tackles, 3 sacks, and 5 interceptions, and also a touchdown that year. He has 4 touchdowns in his entire career, coming in 2015, 1 in 2014, and 2 in 2012. So Harrison Smith, he's kind of old, but he is still pretty good. Xavier Woods is playing free safety for them. Average player, not really super good, not bad either. I mean, he doesn't really put up super great stats. In 2020, he had no interceptions, no sacks, but 72 tackles. 2019 was his best year with 77 combined tackles. No sacks once again, but he's a safety. And he also had 2 interceptions. All in all, this Vikings team, I mean, it's not that great. I would probably say that they're going to go the same 7-9 record once again. They might go 8-8, but I'm probably just going to stick with 7-9. I think that's pretty fair for them. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. That's the NFC North record predictions. If you guys did forget, I'm going to say all of the records again. I think that the Bears are going to go 10-6. The Lions are going to be going 4-12. The Packers, I think, are going to be going 11-5. And then the Vikings are going to be going 7-9. Next episode, or the next video, will be the AFC North. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, guys, peace out. I am also releasing this video on Father's Day. So happy Father's Day to any fathers out there and any fathers that are watching this. And tell your father, happy Father's Day. I'm also dedicating this video to my mom and my dad. So thank you, Mom and Dad. But now, for real, peace out.